Welcome back. Thank you for joining us once again as we are in Holy Week.
Holy Week.
So why do we call it Holy Week?
This is our week. You know, I always tell folks at our church and anywhere I've served, Christmas is great, but Easter, this is our story. The events of this week really are that which shaped our faith and really the things that we celebrate the most of our faith. They are grounded in this week.
And if not for Easter, we would never celebrate Christmas.
Right.
Resurrection. We are people of the resurrection. And this is the week that we witness Jesus give himself up to make a way for us to be connected back to God.
As you alluded to last week, I've alluded to also, when you look at the Gospels themselves, they focus so much on the last week of Jesus' life with an introduction. This week, we're going to walk through those events as closely as we can.
So let's talk about the last week of Jesus' life, at least in the physical sense.
Earthly sense.
And we came into Jerusalem last week on Palm Sunday. So you have to remember, in the Jewish way of the calendar, Saturday is the end of the week. It's the Sabbath. Nothing happens on Sabbath. You rest. Sunday would basically be their Monday.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Palm Sunday, right? Mm-hmm. So Jesus comes into town, first day of the week. He comes in and processes in. He goes to the temple. And what happens at the temple?
Very little. The scriptures say he basically looked around and then walked back up.
Yep. Then they went back out to Bethpage, right?
Went out to Bethpage, which is again right up in the Mount of Olives area. So maybe a mile walk, not a long walk, but a tough walk back up that hill.
But then so let's walk through then. So we're in the city. The parade's happened. He's just walked in, looked at the temple, and then he's gone back out. So take us from there.
So then on Monday, the scriptures record that Jesus makes his way back down into the old town, old city of Jerusalem.
Well, and forget, I said Bethpage, it's Bethany.
Bethany. And he walks back in,
which
and
is
he
Matthew
goes to
21:18. Early the next morning, Jesus went back to the city. He was hungry. Let's just take this all through there.
Yeah. So as he's walking down, he enters into the temple area, and as most of you know, part of the system that was still in place in this day was about sacrifices. They were still offering animal sacrifices for all of the different traditions of the church, both for forgiveness of sins, for thank offerings, all sorts of different things. So this sacrificial system was still in place. And what it meant was that there were traders who were, and when I say the word traders, Traders, when you walked into the temple area to offer sacrifices, you would have to switch the Roman money for the Hebrew money, for the Jewish treasury money. You would have had to oftentimes buy an animal to sacrifice or make your offering. So all of this activity, this commercial activity, takes place in one part of the temple, and Jesus walks in and sees that. And as the scriptures say, you know, he was angry. He reacted strongly against that, and in essence, he cleanses the temple. One gospel records that he took a whip of cords and starts slinging it around and turning over the tables.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's John's gospel. He actually makes a whip out of cords. And one of the things fascinating about John's gospel, John puts it at the beginning of his ministry, right?
Yeah.
And then you have Matthew, Mark, and Luke who put it at the end of his ministry. Don't get too concerned with that, but the point's the same. Jesus is enacting almost like a prophetic sign, right?
What is that prophetic sign? I think that's a fascinating look. This is not a reaction of instantaneous, anger. He's really thought this out.
It's calculated. So the prophets would often do things to symbolize what God was going to do. I think it was Jeremiah who put on the yoke, right? Mm-hmm. Jeremiah also, the pot goes to the potter's house. Ezekiel will bind himself and lay down behind almost a model of of Jerusalem to illustrate siege and bondage. So it's a way of saying, this is what is going to happen. This is what God is doing. And so a prophetic sign act for Jesus in this is a way of saying this is going to be undone. The sacrifice system, the corruption of the temple is being washed clean.
Because so often what happens, and I believe what Jesus was reacting to in that day, he says, you've made a house of prayer into a den of robbers. Mm-hmm. And I worry so much sometimes about when we are in the institutional religion that we are, and we want to stay pure, we want to stay holy, but there's also a business aspect to what we do. I get paid, you get paid, mm-hmm. There are buildings and all of that. I worry that sometimes we lose the focus of that this is the house of prayer for God, and yet we sometimes make it into a commercial and economic thing. And I worry if Jesus came in, would he turn our tables over? Would he would he react strongly against what we do?
Well, and I think that should cause us to take a critical look at, are we being faithful to our faith? Are we being faithful to the teachings of Jesus and how we go about our work? Are we serving who he would have us serve, or are we only serving ourselves?
Yeah. So this dramatic act, I think probably, as I've understood it and been explained to me, this is the precipitating event around which the die is cast. When you start messing with the temple treasury, when you start messing with people's
when you start messing with the economy.
When you start messing with the economy, Jesus has in essence sealed his fate.
Right.
It probably took them an hour to put the tables back up, to restore what he had done.
So why did they not arrest him then and there?
So that's a great question. I don't know if they thought, okay, if we do this now, it's going to cause even more of a.
I think you're onto something there. One of the things that is going on here is we saw with the coming in crowds, there were people who were paying attention. And if Jesus had been, and so Jesus is very popular with the common people, with the crowds. And so, again, you're in the temple, it's a big complex, lots of people around. If he had been arrested and taken away then it probably would have triggered a riot. You trigger a riot, the Romans get involved, and you don't want the Romans involved. So the temple authorities have already set in motion that they know they want to get Jesus, basically, but they have to find a way to arrest Jesus without any fanfare.
Without causing even more ruckus. So, in essence, Matthew gives us in this next little story, so Jesus cleanses the temple, goes out to Bethany. The next day he returns back. And this is what Matthew records in chapter 21, verse 18. The next morning, when Jesus returned to the city, he was hungry. And he saw a fig tree by the side of the road. He went to it and found nothing at all on it but leaves. Then he said to it, "May no fruit ever come from you again." And the fig tree withered at once.
Yeah.
When the disciples saw it, they were amazed, saying, "How did the fig tree wither at once?" Jesus answered them, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only will you do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to the mountain, 'Be lifted up and thrown into the sea,' it will be done. Whatever you ask for in prayer with faith, you will receive." Now, what I want to focus in on this part is that what does the fig tree represent? And the fig tree represents...
I hope you can answer, because I don't know.
So the fig tree, I think, represents the cult. It represents the faith of Israel. It represents the whole, polluted system of how people came into and the sacrificial system and the rejection of Jesus as the Messiah.
That which was supposed to produce fruit was producing no fruit.
Was producing nothing. And so the fig tree, and this is, again, go back to the Old Testament, this is a long-standing, a fig tree is a long-standing symbol for Israel, the people called Israel. And so what Jesus is doing, I think, is making a commentary, and he curses that fig tree and it withers. And it is in essence, Jesus is condemning all of that activity that certainly is not of God, and especially this rejection of Him as Messiah.
Well, and then you get to this really, I think, interesting and at times difficult kind of thing of, well, if you pray for anything with faith, that it will be done. Help us understand that.
Yeah, this is one of those things. It's also included in Mark. Jesus uses the faith of a mustard seed and says, it grows and flourishes. I think there might be some hyperbole in this, but it is also to point out to us when we are moved to this deep sense of faith, and our will is aligned with God, and we recognize that miracles can happen.
And it's also, one of the images is a mountain being cast into the sea. Jerusalem's located on the holy mountain, on Zion, and that this mountain that has this amazing significance, and it's still, we still are drawn to that mountain, no doubt, but that God's interaction with the world is coming through Jesus, not through a mountain, right, or not through a temple any longer. It's a huge change in how God is accessed, and it's through Jesus. So that whole thing is shifting. So I think there's a little something there too.
There is. So folks, we hope that you will again pay attention to the events of this week. Read especially through the Gospels this last week, and if you have questions, we'd of course love to entertain those. But thank you for joining us today. We're in Holy Week.
Thank you.